The Uyghurs are a Turkic ethnic group in modern-day China, primarily in what China calls the Xinjiang region. To the Uyghurs, of course, they call this East Turkestan. There are 11 million plus Uyghurs, and they are the second largest Muslim group in China after the Hui people. They have their own language, and their culture is distinct from that of mainland China. The Xinjiang region, or East Turkestan, is autonomously governed, or it was autonomously governed, meaning they govern themselves to an extent despite living under China's governmental system. The Uyghurs consider themselves occupied by China as the region was conquered by the Chinese in the late 1800s. The Xinjiang region is massive. It is 3 times the size of France and has important resources such as oil, gas, minerals, and even cotton. It's also strategically important to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, with many railroad lines and highways cutting through the territory on its way to Europe. So the region is of vital importance to the Chinese central government. Bear with me. The Uyghurs insist they face discrimination and oppression by the ethnic Han majority. There is a movement to gain independence from China, and there are Islamic groups within Turkestan that use violence to achieve their political goals. The Chinese government claims they are cracking down on security threats in the region to counter terrorism. Part of these crackdowns include the development of internment camps where Uyghurs are allegedly held for what the Chinese government calls job training facilities. The Uyghurs insist that these are propaganda camps where Uyghurs are tortured, raped, beaten, abused, and forced to abandon their cultural and religious beliefs in exchange for a more Chinese identity. There are a lot of details that I am, of course, leaving out for the sake of time. You have claimed that there is no Uyghur genocide taking place, another position that has angered Muslims, leading some to call you a hypocrite. They say you condemn Israeli genocide, but greenlight a Chinese one because of your affinity for the Communist Party and multipolar world order. I'd like you to clarify your position on this. Do you, in fact, deny the quote-unquote genocide, and if so, how would you describe China's actions?
Well, anybody who calls what's happening in China genocide is doing an extreme disservice to those who are fighting a real genocide in Gaza and Palestine, West Bank, all that, because there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever. It's all concocted by the State Department and the CIA and the military-industrial complex, both in the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom. And what I think is so, and also, oddly enough, Qatar and Turkey are also backers of this narrative, and Israel. Israel's a big backer of the narrative that there's a genocide going on in Xinjiang, which is hilarious. They've actually gone to the extent of condemning China at the United Nations for allegedly carrying out a genocide against the Uyghur Muslims, as if they care about Muslims, you know? So I think that, you touched on some important points there. Yes, this region, Xinjiang, is very important to China, but it's also very important to the rest of the world. There was a very famous godfather of geopolitics in the 1940s. His name was Mackinder, and he termed the phrase the Eurasian heartland, which is essentially like the Xinjiang region, Central Asia, Afghanistan, Kurdistan, or Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, all those regions. And the idea is that this is such a resource-rich region of the world. And not only is it resource-rich, but it connects China, which at the time and for many, many thousands of years has been a region that is highly populated, with the Middle East, with Iran, with Russia to the north, and further down with Europe. It's where all this, some of the major routes on the Silk Road were. So this region is very important, and the CIA has spent a lot of time and a lot of money over the past 50 or so years since Brzezinski to try and take control of that region and establish U.S. subservient leaders in that region, or to balkanize China in the case of Xinjiang. Balkanize means to split it up, so you wouldn't have one China, you'd have a bunch of smaller Chinese states, which weakens the power of it. And the newest iteration of that is what we're seeing with this claim of a genocide in Xinjiang. But to give a little bit more context on the history, essentially the claims of violent acts in the name of East Turkestan Uyghur separatism are true. Between 1996 and the early 2000s, there was, I think, about 200 violent terrorist attacks that took place by radical Uyghurs in this region and in other places of China further west. I think we have to be very important when we say the Uyghurs say this, the Uyghur did this, the Uyghurs believe this, because the radical elements that currently now are being funded by the CIA, like they're on the CIA checkbook, they're being paid by the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a CIA organization. They're being paid by Radio Free Asia, which is also funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. You know, like those individuals, the radical elements, they don't represent the overwhelming majority of the Uyghur people. The overwhelming majority of the Uyghur people, frankly, I think they just want to live a happy life. I think they want to have mosques to go and pray at. I think they want to have the ability to live a functioning life in China, and they want to have a safe neighborhood with good jobs. You know, that's kind of like, that's kind of the basics of life, you know? When it comes to the Xinjiang region, China's built over 20,000 mosques. There's these videos going viral on social media of like mosques being destroyed, and then we come to find out it's like in a different country halfway across the world. The number one celebrity in China is a Uyghur Muslim. The Uyghur Muslim population is actually increasing at a faster rate than the Han Chinese population because they weren't held to the one China policy in Xinjiang. Uyghur Muslim script is written on all the national currencies. I was just in China, so I got to see it myself. We don't even do that for Native Americans here, which I think is interesting. But the history of these terror attacks with Uyghur radicals began after some of them went to go fight with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. They became radicalized by this ideology that was exported from Saudi Arabia. They then came back to Xinjiang to try and establish a free Xinjiang. And when that didn't happen, there wasn't enough people, they began to do these terror attacks, some of which killed hundreds of people, very large ones, some of which weren't as deadly. They also tried to actually seize an Airbus and crash an Airbus in China, which would have been horrific, but it was stopped. And at the end of the day, I guess their mission for establishing a free and independent East Turkestan failed. So now they're having to rely on the international Western community to try and bankroll them and further exacerbate the claims that they're putting out of genocide. The claim of genocide is interesting because it was actually initiated by U.S. government workers who went to Xinjiang, a region of 11 million people, and they interviewed a grand total of 8 Uyghur Muslims in a region of 11 million people. They did this because they went to 8 different villages, interviewed one person in each village, and said, roughly, how many people do you know of who are imprisoned in a concentration camp, they called it. And he said like 250 people, 300 people, 400 people I know personally. Then they extrapolated those numbers, those percentages, on the entire population of 11 million Uyghur Muslims. So that's how you get those crazy numbers of 2 to 3 million people being in these camps. There was just a big Uyghur tribunal that was held, World Uyghur Tribunal that was held, which was an effort to, I guess, encourage Western businesses to look at this propaganda and to cease doing any business in the Xinjiang region. And even at this World Uyghur Congress, or the tribunal they called it, the official, Uyghur CIA paid propaganda said that there was only 5,571 documented Uyghurs that they could point to who were put in these camps. So that, according to them, that's their own stat of verifiable evidence that they have. Besides that, there was not a single case of hard evidence that was actually presented in the tribunal. There was a lot of testimonies that have been proven in one way or another to be lies because some of the main people who gave testimonies and witnesses of the alleged crimes or people who were victim to it have changed their stories like hundreds of times when they go on CNN or the BBC or wherever. And it's kind of like that Yeonmi Park figure from North Korea. Like every other week, she's telling a crazy story about North Korea that's just so unbelievable. But the whole goal of this, in short, is basically the United States knows that if it can economically weaken the Xinjiang region, you're going to have more people fall into poverty. You're going to have more people that become critical of the Chinese government. You're going to have more people that maybe even fall into that radical terrorism that was brought from the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And overall, that's going to sow discord and destabilization for China. And China's done a very good job of implementing 5-year economic, in some cases 10-year economic plans in the region to try and actually uplift the standard of living of those people. And it worked. There's like a lot more jobs that were operating there. Cotton industry is really big there. I think even Elon Musk might have some business out there, if I remember correctly. But what the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia are doing in trying to sow these seeds of, genocide, conspiracy, it causes Western businesses to say, okay, well, there's this really bad story out there about how there's a genocide happening there. We have factories out there. We're getting our cotton from there. It wouldn't be that much more expensive if we did our business in Indonesia or in Taiwan instead. So let's just take our entire factory and the thousands of jobs and move them elsewhere. When you do that, the Uyghur people are left without jobs. And actually, there's been some organizations that have had to pay out hundreds of thousands of dollars to Uyghurs for making up those lies and causing them to lose their jobs. So, this has all the earmarkings of a CIA, destabilization effort. I have a story about it on my Instagram. People can go look at all the details because too many to even answer in this one question. But overall, do I think that there's those re-education camps? I mean, I don't know how much they're still doing there, the labor camps, whatever they call them. I mean, we don't really know what they're doing in there, but it's very clear that it's not a genocide or anything like that. I mean, it's 2024. If there was a genocide, it'd be filmed. There's only been one photo of an alleged camp that has been published. It's with all the guys in the blue jackets. That was actually a drug rehab facility. So those images go viral. That's not even one of the alleged, re-education or labor camps that everyone talks about. There were 4 satellite photos of the alleged camps. I think Vice News published them. One of those photos was a middle school. One of them was a high school. One of them was a logistics center, and one of them was a cell tower center. So it's like, they use these same old tactics, like when they said they had satellite photos to prove that there were WMD in Iraq, and then they have satellites to prove that there's a genocide going on in China. And there's too many inconsistencies and too many red flags here, and frankly, no evidence whatsoever to back the claims that there's a genocide. So that's why I say people who put forward these claims, it's doing a disservice to the real genocide happening in Gaza. And actually, you're hurting Uyghur Muslims inside of China because, you're causing them to lose their jobs and have more poverty in and around them, which should be the opposite of someone if you want to help the people. So it's, as Putin said, you can't beat Western propaganda. And that's the case definitely with this region.